All right, we're preparing to live stream.
It says live.
I think we might be live.
I think we are.
Hang on, that's almost. As soon as I get an echo, then we'll know. Hmm. I'm watching our YouTube channel. I don't see anything. Oh, nope, it says live. I
Yeah,
think we're live.
that's
I
what
don't know
it
why I'm
said
not
to me
seeing.
too.
Yeah, I know. I don't see. Okay, well, whatever. I'm using a new streaming service, everybody. So just bear with me today. Oh, there we go. Okay, now we are officially on YouTube. There we go. Um,
Yay.
Hello.
Hello.
So, hi. So, I'm so excited today to have the special guest that we have today. And this is Mrs. Alexandra Reynolds. And I
You.
met Alex at IOCDF this year and was just so excited about hearing her story, her journey through OCD, through treatment. And when I met her, this was back in July. And since
Mhm.
then, I've just been like, we have to get you on the air to sort of show everybody that it's possible to come out the other side, even with really severe symptoms, because when you began, it was really severe symptoms.
Mhm.
Um, I am, as always, Dr. Katie Mineta, and I want to just to give a little bit of a disclaimer for everybody out there who's watching that this is never a substitute for therapy, that this is really intended just to be informational, and that if you are in need of mental health services, please seek out a trained therapist. And if you're in a mental health crisis or emergency, please call 911. That's here in the US. Go to your nearest emergency room. Please stay safe. So we're going to start. And let me just make sure I have a little exclamation. No, okay, I think we're good. All right, I'm just hoping there's no glitches or problems today, but we're going to see. We're doing this a little differently. So, um, Alex, I want you to tell me, do you remember when you first noticed OCD symptoms, whether or not you realized it was OCD?
Yeah, and if it takes me a minute to unmute myself, I apologize. My son is in the background playing a game, and so I mute
That's
myself
okay.
so
We're
you don't hear the
informal
squeaking.
today, so don't worry.
So if you hear screaming, everything is okay. He's just playing a game.
For me, it's the dogs barking. You might hear dogs barking today, but we'll see.
I love it. Yeah, so I feel like I can kind of trace back my symptoms as far as maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I think that's kind of like, when your memory starts.
Yeah.
And so I remember being very afraid of being without my mom or my brother and having this fear be so strong that if I wasn't near them, I couldn't sleep. If I was left, with like a daycare or a babysitter, I would cry until I got sick. It carried over into, I think, like pre-K and kindergarten, elementary school. And so I remember that was sort of the first manifestation of it. That and a lot of organization and symmetry and checking. So a lot of what I now know are just right symptoms, even
Right.
back when I was a little itty bitty child.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because what you just described, often it's sort of our first clue that OCD might be coming, and it looks just like separation anxiety. And most often that's what we diagnose is separation anxiety in the little ones that have a hard time separating from caregivers to go to school, et cetera. And so that's a real common sort of early story. So now tell me, when did symptoms start worsening and interfering and like, really sort of, well, I won't even ask when you knew you had OCD. We'll talk about that later. First, I just want to know sort of what the progression of your symptoms was.
Yeah, so it's funny you said separation anxiety because that is exactly what I was diagnosed with a little bit later on with separation anxiety disorder.
Mhm.
And I went to a counselor for a few sessions, just a couple sessions. And once my parents were like, "Oh, well, she got treatment. She should be good." They pulled me right out.
Yeah.
And from there, my symptoms didn't get better. they got worse, I think I just started learning to hide them more. And so
Yeah.
from there, it looked like still a lot of just right, a lot of symmetry. I remember, getting those packages of like white socks. Like they just come in like a package of 12 pairs. And there's a point to this. I would try to match the socks like with which one I'd worn. Like so they were always with the same mate,
Oh,
even though it
but
was a
they're identical, Alex. How is
I
that
know
possible?
it's not possible, but OCD
Right.
told little Alex that this was possible, and not only was it possible, but this was a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah.
And I had all kinds of obsessions like this. So lots of symmetry, lots of organization, lots of just right. Also, as I got older, lots of contamination. So I started to feel dirty all the time. And like I needed to change my clothes a lot. This really started to kind of hit this fever pitch in high school where, I'm getting older, my hormones are starting to rage. I
Yeah.
remember feeling anxious all day during
Mm.
school, all day, to the point where I thought I had like a sweating disorder because I was just always sweaty, but I feel like it was the anxiety and the
Yeah.
distress. I was just so terrified of being perceived by
Mm.
anybody
Right.
because I had all these social obsessions.
So you
And
were worried that like people would notice you were sweating and be like, oh, why are you anxious, right?
yeah,
This isn't an anxiety provoking situation. It's not like you're singing in public. Why are you so sweaty? That kind of
yeah,
stuff.
and
Yeah.
even just like, fears around like, what if everybody hates me? What if everybody thinks I'm not smart? What if everybody thinks, I'm this or that? Am I not cool enough? Am I not punk enough? Am I
Hmm.
like, what if I'm not perceived the way I want to be perceived? And it just, the list goes on and on. And so this was when it really, really started to get bad.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. You went from this presentation that looked really a lot like separation anxiety to this presentation that looked a lot like social anxiety disorder,
Mhm.
right? Which is once again really a common trajectory for OCD symptoms. So where did it go from there?
Oh man. So from there, obviously, I went to undergraduate, and in undergraduate, it sort of took the tone of health anxiety, which is really interesting because I feel like that's actually not necessarily sort of the norm, but
Hmm.
I started to have all of these really intense obsessions and fears around my health, and my parents had this health book that came from the health insurance at the time that was like a nurse line where you could call and get health
Oh
advice.
no.
It was like the perfect reassurance. And so I had
Right.
this health book and I took possession of it. It became like my thing and it lived in my room. This is so unhealthy. And I would read it and diagnose myself with every condition in the book, no matter how unlikely, no matter how rare. And I would call the nurse line and ask a million questions. And then when I got my license and I was driving, I would take myself to the doctor all the time over every
Mm.
little thing. And one of my biggest fears was that I would have a heart attack. And I was
Oh.
afraid that I was going to have a heart attack while I was driving. And so I
Mm.
started to get to the point where I was actually having panic attacks almost as soon as I got behind the wheel. And I would
Right.
have to pull over
Yeah.
because I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a heart attack and die and I'm gonna kill somebody and it's gonna be so bad, it's gonna be all my fault and
Right.
I'm not gonna be here anymore. And it became really, I think, difficult to function
Right.
that way in
Yeah.
college because my mind was always racing with all of these horrible thoughts when I was supposed to be studying, paying attention, doing all my work. And
Yeah.
I think you can only mask for so
Yeah.
long.
So long. That's true. But it's so interesting because part of what you're describing, I think, is a really a common phenomenon with OCD, with what is ultimately OCD, that we see sort of all of these different permutations that sort of suggest other disorders, right? We've discussed, the earlier ones, and now here we have sort of a presentation that looks like panic disorder. And of course, we can have these double diagnoses, right, at OCD and panic disorder, but it is sort of interesting where your OCD ended up, because I know, and the fact that when you drove and were fearful of having a panic attack and having panic symptoms, it was more like, what if I kill someone, right? What if I
Mhm.
have a panic attack while I'm driving and then I have to like live with this, right, horrible guilt that I've killed somebody, which is sort of
Mhm.
more of an OCD, right, kind of
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
more like a
thing.
harm thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so now you're doing your undergraduate, you're in college, and you're having these really unbearable symptoms. Now, at this
Mhm.
point, was there any medication, mental health help? No.
No.
Unreal. I can't even imagine going through all of this without the benefit
No,
of.
so this is where, and I just warning, it gets a little dark. But bear with me, y'all, because it gets better on the other side of it. And so just, I want to say that because I
But
don't
I
want
think,
people
Alex, I
like,
mean, I think your experience, right, of like how difficult
yeah,
and how dark and how painful it got, like this is what so many people with OCD go through before they're diagnosed, right? So, yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I was in undergraduate and I was really kind of starting to spin out, I think, and I started to experience a lot of panic attacks in the classroom because I think that the panic kind of carried over, right? So now not only was it in the car, but it was in the classroom, and it was this fear of freaking out in front of my whole class. And oh my God, what if I freak out? What if I faint in front of everybody? This is going to be so terrible. I can't handle it. At
Yeah.
the same time, I was going through a little bit of real health stuff, not anything major, just a little bit of real health stuff. And I was kind of trying to figure out who I was and having a hard time sort of finding an identity. And I think at that point was when it crystallized for me something is wrong because I'm not adjusting the way my peers are.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's wrong, and I didn't realize that it was such a serious mental health thing. And so it created this sense for me of being very disconnected or unreal, which led to a lot of DPDR, like depersonalization, derealization.
Derealization.
So
Yeah.
I started experiencing these really long episodes, and I would just
Mm.
kind of have to power through them. And the
Mm.
worse my symptoms got, the more I got to the point where I couldn't even function. And so I ended up not really leaving my dorm after a while at all and failing out of a lot of classes. And this is kind of when I started to discover, substances. And the substances provided a relief from
Yeah.
all of those symptoms. It
Right.
quieted the thoughts. It made me feel better short term.
Right.
And I want to
Yeah.
stress
And
that
so
it's
in the
short term.
absence, right? In the absence of any therapy or diagnosis, and it's such a shame, right? When we hear your story, it's such a shame as we think about all of those doctors, all of those nurses, right? All of those people who had contact with you
Mhm.
who really should have picked up on this as being a larger problem that required a
Yeah.
trained therapist, a trained psychiatrist to come in there and intervene.
Yeah.
And
So
that wasn't done,
it
right?
wasn't
And so there you were having to deal with it on your own.
it wasn't in a vacuum, right? So I had
Yeah.
contact with my professors and I think that, they had a feeling that something was wrong. I went to the school's, little counseling clinic and tried to get help there and I didn't have a lot of resources. So I didn't have the money or really the understanding to go to a therapist. My family had always told me that therapists were bad people and that I couldn't trust
Mm.
them.
Interesting.
Culturally, I think that was just a cultural thing. And so I had a big distrust. And this all kind of
Hmm.
culminated in me becoming extremely depressed, failing out of my
Oh,
undergraduate, and not getting out of bed for several days.
oh,
And my one of my friends came over and was like, well, you really need help. Like you can't just lay in bed, you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not doing anything, you're just
Right.
smoking cigarettes and staying in the bed, and
Right.
this is not healthy. And he's like, let me take you to the hospital. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. So he finally got me to the hospital, and at the hospital, they were like, well, you need to go somewhere. They
Hmm.
wouldn't let me leave,
Yeah.
um, which was really scary because I didn't understand what was happening or what was going on with me.
It's
They just had
terrifying.
someone in the room with me who asked a bunch of questions, and then all of a sudden I couldn't leave. I was like,
Right.
what is going on? So they
Mm.
had the police come and get me,
Oh.
and they put me in handcuffs, and they took me to this really notorious inpatient hospital here in Georgia.
Mm. Mm.
And they said that I had psychosis, that I was psychotic, and I think it might have been because of the intrusive thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
So they diagnosed me with psychotic depression, and they put me on all these medications, which made me feel
Right.
horrible.
And which, once again, Alex, right? I mean, now you know, right, that these diagnoses of psychosis, are really common for people
Yep.
with severe OCD. And it's
Yep.
crazy how often we've been referred patients at my practice who with the diagnosis of schizophrenia, even.
Hmm.
But when you actually ask them, and it's interesting because there's a lot of therapists out there that are trained not to ask why, and I think that's a huge problem because what ends up happening is that, right, is that when somebody's talking about this, like, oh, I feel like I'm affecting other people around me. I
Hmm.
have to do this behavior or else bad thing. It's like they're not saying, well, why? Why are you doing that? And what will happen if that happens, right? And they're not sort of digging deeper into that. They just hear it and they go, oh, this is so alarming, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and this
Exactly.
sounds crazy. This sounds crazy. And
Yeah,
so
and
they
that's
they
exactly
they
what
miss they
happened.
miss the diagnosis and they misdiagnose, right?
Absolutely
Yeah.
both. And so I got nothing out of that.
Yeah.
All I got was you can't trust these people, and
Yeah.
you never want to go back there again, so you better lie, 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 lie. And
Oh,
that kind of began this sort of descent into a lot of substance use and, off and on like homelessness and just really being lost. I still
yeah.
had no idea who I was or what I was or what I wanted to do. I just kind of did whatever. And
Yeah.
all I really knew is that every time I tried to do something with myself, after a while it kind of came apart.
Mm.
And I didn't fully understand why. And I kept trying to get it together,
Yeah.
but it was just not happening. Eventually, I got tired of this same pattern repeating. And so
Mhm.
I was in and out of therapists trying to figure out what was going on. And most of the time, they would be like, well, this isn't going anywhere. I don't know what to do with you. Basically, like, I can't see you anymore.
Oh,
And I got the
ouch.
message that, like, I was just too much or like I was untreatable.
Right. But the truth is, right, is that most therapists are not really well trained in treating OCD. And, I hear this all the time that people are like, well, I took a class in graduate school on the DSM, and so I surely know how to diagnose OCD. And
Right.
I took a class in CBT, and so
Right.
surely I should know how to
Oh, I know
treat.
OCD. It's when
Right.
people
I
love
know
to drink
OCD
too
and I know
much.
how to treat it. And what do you have? I mean, at best, or the best case scenario, right, is that you have the therapist providing a ton of reassurance, which is really terrible for
Yes.
OCD, right? But
Yes.
even worse than that is that sort of tendency to make the person feel so pathologized, right? Because they're like, I can't help you. I don't know what to do with you. All of my reassurance, it's not helping. Like I remember I had this little 11-year-old girl once that said, she said, she said, I'm just not doing the breathing right. That's my problem. I'm not doing the breathing
Poor
right. Like it's
thing.
her fault, right? Because
Poor
she's not doing
thing.
it right.
And
And,
that's
and
how
they
it
tell me
feels.
not to worry about it. And I keep worrying about it. And I'm like, oh gosh, what a
Yes.
terrible piece of advice, right? Don't worry about it.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it was. I would get all this information like, oh, you just need to breathe, or you need to not worry about it, or all these things aren't
Yeah.
really that important. And I was like, okay, but if it's unimportant and I don't need to worry about it, then why can't I like get unstuck, you
Yeah.
know? So I finally, at some point, like run into this lady who diagnoses me with OCD, which is not on my radar at all. Except she doesn't do any like imaginal exposures, and she doesn't do any psychoeducation.
Oh no.
So she only did exposures for my driving. That was it.
Oh.
And she only did like a little bit of in vivo contamination, but she did not explain what OCD was. She did not like, there was just, there was nothing. There was no education. And so I didn't walk away with any real information on how to manage my OCD. I
Right.
did get to drive again, which
Well,
was
that's good.
helpful. And from there, I was just kind of like, well, at least I can drive. And, I guess the rest of me is whatever I have going on is just not treatable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I continued down that same self-destructive, lost path
Yeah.
for a long time. I eventually became a domestic violence victim advocate. And that was like when my OCD and everything else that I had going on just really collided. I was going through a lot of vicarious trauma, like I was going out to people's houses and witnessing violence and seeing like the after effects and going
Yeah.
with the police to remove children from homes, like things that
Yeah.
I probably should
Domestic
not have
violence
been
work. I've
doing.
I that's where I got my start, and it's really
It's a lot.
it's not easy. Yeah.
And so I was going to court with the victims and doing all these things. And on the outside, I was holding it together, but I had no health insurance. I had no resources. There was
Yeah.
nothing for us about self-care really or anything like that. And so after 3 years, I burned out spectacularly. I ended up in an abusive relationship myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was still using substances. I added in alcohol, and I was just really, at my lowest.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need to change. Something has to happen because no matter where I go, there I am.
Yeah.
There's a common denominator, and it's me, not in a blamey way, but in the fact that this is internal.
Yeah.
And so I moved back home, which is something no one wants to do. And I
But it is
found,
something that a lot of patients with OCD really they find themselves in a place where they have to go and do that. They just need some support. And
yep,
so having family around that will take us in is sometimes a helpful thing. Yeah.
yeah, it was the best thing I could have done. I ended up, getting just a job and kind of getting back on my feet. And I started looking around for therapists, and I was like, well, I think I have OCD. I think I understand that this is what I have now, so let me find somebody. And so I called around a few places, and the therapist who had the kindest voice and actually called me back was the one that I ended up going with.
Uh-huh.
And I got really lucky in that he specialized in ERP and that he knew what he
Oh,
was doing. And
wow.
that was where I finally started to get better and things really started to turn around.
Yeah. Yeah. So exciting. And so what kind of exposures did that first therapist or that first real sort of ERP therapist have you doing?
Oh my gosh, everything. I did scripts. I did like imaginals, where we were just picturing things. No driving exposures, but we did a lot of contamination exposures because contamination, I think, has been like my most persistent theme, and it ties into my health stuff.
Yeah.
So lots of like touching the toilet, touch this gross thing over here. Let's go eat in public. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
do all these different things. Let's go to the store and I'm gonna buy you a snack and you're gonna eat it with your hands without sanitizing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the grocery store. Push your finger into this meat. Don't get caught.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it was. It was. It was a really good one. And so there was, and I think in there was mixed a lot of like that social exposure, that
Yeah.
fear of being perceived, fear of being judged by others, like, oh, what are people going to say if they see me, eating this grape in the grocery store? So there
Yeah.
was that moral piece too. There was a lot of just really heavy, sort of exposing me to everything that I feared. And it was great. It worked to a point because I am stubborn and I am headstrong. And I was like, all
Mhm.
right, I'm cured.
Yeah.
I'm cured and I'm
Yeah.
better and I never have to go back to therapy again. And I graduated ERP and I left and I did not do any ERP after that. I didn't even think about my OCD. And I
Yeah.
started working and I got married and I had a kid. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm OCD free until I got pregnant.
Which
And
is
then,
also, right? Such a common trigger time for people when they're
yes.
pregnant, hormonal changes, and then also just the fact of having a baby. I mean, it really, yeah, it
Yeah,
changes a
and
lot.
it crept back in so slowly. I feel like I didn't notice it really. And then I had
Yeah.
my son and COVID hit and it was just like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Contamination, health anxiety. My husband was still going to work because he had to. He couldn't do his job remotely. And here I am at home with a baby and I feel like all my worst fears, are coming true. And I was like, every day I was terrified. I was like, we're gonna die, we're gonna die, we're gonna die. He's gonna bring it home and he's gonna kill the baby.
Yeah.
And I got so depressed. And I mean, in that postpartum too, I remember finally making an appointment with my therapist and being like,
Mhm.
I hope he takes me back. And
Right.
then getting on the little telehealth thing, and I'm just like waiting for him to come on. And I'm sitting with my back to this couch and I'm holding my son because he's an infant. And I
Hmm.
haven't showered in like a week. And I look
Mm.
a hot mess because I have been decontaminating my house like top to bottom every day. Like I must have
Yeah.
looked horrible. And
Yeah.
he gets on the call and he's like, oh my God, Alex, what has happened to you? And I was like,
Oh. Oh no, it's like suddenly it hit you, right?
it
Yeah.
hit me how bad I was. And I think that that might have been very intentional to
Yeah.
let me know that I was in bad shape,
That you had gone too far down that rabbit hole, right?
And I
Yeah.
think in that moment, it was, some people might be like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. But I feel like it was very therapeutic. I needed
Yeah.
someone to validate
Right.
how I was feeling.
Yeah.
And at that moment, like the mask dropped and I just crumbled. And I was like, I can't do anything. I can't leave my house. I didn't leave my house for 2 years.
Wow.
I was just paralyzed by this fear of COVID killing my son.
Right.
And it's
Now,
like
Alex,
the most precious thing I have.
I hope you're okay with sharing this part of it, but I found it really interesting some of the ways that you would have your husband
Oh, yeah.
reassure you. I think it's both adorable and gosh, I mean, it's painful, but please do if you
It's
feel
painful and
comfortable sharing
adorable.
that. Yeah.
No, of course, yeah. So, my husband, my poor husband, he has just been such a good sport through all of this. And I mean, he was a good sport up until he wasn't because I pushed him there, or OCD pushed him there.
Yeah.
So the first was when I locked him in the basement. I didn't lock him in the basement, but I sent him to the basement for 10 days during COVID because I got tired of decontaminating everything after he got
Right.
home, and I was so
Right.
afraid that he was going to give COVID to me and my son that I was like, well, why don't you just live downstairs? Like, we have it downstairs, why don't you just go down there?
Right.
He was a good sport about it for 10 days, and then he was like, this is ridiculous, which he was
Yeah.
right. He's like, this is
Yeah.
ridiculous. I'm not living downstairs.
Right.
Um, you need to get help.
Yeah.
And so I kind of swallowed it down and I was like, all right, fine. But on the inside, I was not fine with it. So
Right.
what I started doing was I started asking him for reassurance when he was at work. Text him,
Mm.
do you have COVID? Are you okay? Is anyone near you coughing? Has
Yeah.
anyone called out because they're sick? Are you wearing a mask? How many
Yeah.
masks are you wearing? We agreed on two because I had him wearing two masks. Like this
Wow.
poor man,
Yeah.
he had to talk for a living and he's wearing two masks.
Yeah.
And, he starts getting annoyed with it. He starts giving me like really short answers and then he starts sending me emojis. And the little emoji, the little emoji he's sending me is the cup, the little cup on the iPhone with his hand up. And so he's like trying to tell me to stop.
Right.
So instead of stopping, I'm like, oh, I see. I'm not asking you. I'm asking the emoji. And I was like, the chief. That's the chief. I'm not asking
Chief.
you anymore. I am asking the chief.
That's right.
Do you have COVID?
That's right.
He
So
starts,
instead of stopping, you're just like, I'm just going to ask the chief. We just need to hear it from the chief.
yeah,
Yeah.
we just need to hear it from the chief. And so
Yeah.
he's like, all right, fine. So he plays along and he's like, all right. The chief says no. Spencer does not have COVID. The
Yes.
chief says that Spencer has been wearing 2 masks. And so the chief progresses from there, and the chief gets a voice. And so the chief has his own little voice that sometimes will send a voice memo, and he'll be like, no, no, Spence does not have COVID.
So this is your husband's voice, right? But he has to do it in a certain tone because that's really reassuring to you. This
That's
sort of
extremely
authoritative, right?
It is the best. So for a while, this, helps a little bit, but as we know, it only helps for a short period of time. So I start
Right.
needing the chief like all the time, constantly. And so he
Right.
gets tired of the chief. And so I was like, okay, okay, fine, fine. Can we do like express chief? So this is like the chief, but faster. So then the chief gives me like a 1 sentence answer. And he
Yeah.
got tired of that. So then I was
Yeah.
like, okay, we just need Chief to go. Chief to go is like one word, just one
Yeah.
word. Do you have COVID? Yes or no?
The drive-through chief, right?
Yeah, basically. So this continues until finally he's like, I'm sending the chief to an island on vacation. The chief is tired of you.
Oh, no.
Luckily for him, this is around the time I'm actually starting to get better because I've been doing ERP with my
Yeah.
therapist this whole time, and I'm finally kind of coming around. And so eventually the chief fades away. But
Yeah.
like the chief was a thing, and it's funny, but also it's amazing to kind of know what OCD can make us do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is part of the problem, right? Is that people hear just this little snippet of what you're asking your husband to do or making him be in the basement. And they're like, oh, surely this is some other problem, right? They don't often think that it's OCD, but truly I mean, the story you tell is just exactly OCD, right? I mean, now we know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, people hear things like this and they're like, oh, well, that's just bonkers. OCD would never make somebody do that.
Yeah, because OCD is just people being fastidious or whatever. And it's like
Right. Like
so
they
much
might believe
more.
that I was decontaminating, or they might believe that I was washing hands a lot, which I also was. But they're missing all the other things that I'm doing that are not just affecting me, but they're affecting my family,
Right.
and they're debilitating me because it's so much of my life. I mean, my whole life was rituals. If I
Yeah.
wasn't cleaning and I wasn't decontaminating and I wasn't caring for my son, then I'm on my phone, like constantly checking the news, and I'm freaking out mentally and trying to reassure myself, and I'm texting the chief, and all those
All
things.
of those things. Wow. And so I'm curious, when you were doing all of those compulsions and you were doing treatment for it, was there any point at which you instructed your husband to not reassure you? Or was it like you that was or was it both? What was going on?
I mean, it was both. I was trying to not seek reassurance,
Hmm.
and my eye. My therapist was modeling that for me.
Uh-huh.
But also, I did, at some point, I did, have to talk to my husband and be like, this is what's going on. This is why this is so bad. This is why I have been this way. And,
Right.
I love the chief, but I'm not supposed to get chief.
Right.
Not supposed to get reassurance about COVID. Like, I'm supposed to be going out and leaving the house and doing things,
Hmm.
and I need your help.
Yeah.
And of course, he felt very affirmed, and he
Yeah.
was like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And that caused arguments at first, because I
I
would
bet.
really want the reassurance, or I would get caught in a loop of compulsions, and he would kind of be like, hey, are you supposed to be doing that? And
Right.
I'd get angry.
Yeah, of course, because, as we know, right? I mean, anger and anxiety are two sides of the same coin. And
Hmm.
so it's really common that if loved ones aren't giving into our rituals, that's the response is that anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like I got angry, and even my ruminations, if my ruminations were interrupted, I would just explode with anger.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
it's like you're preventing me from doing the thing that I feel like I absolutely must do right now.
Right. Right. So now one of our viewers had this question, and I thought it was such a good question about, and they actually took issue with something John had said in a previous episode,
Well,
right?
we all take issue with things John says.
That's true. That is true. And John can be very abrasive. Sometimes I have to say, well, John, let's be a little nicer. But anyway, so somebody took issue with something that he said, and he had been talking to one of our viewers who I think, I can't remember what her fear was. It was something about being poisoned or something like that. Or I think getting cancer from something. And, he wanted her to, contemplate the idea of going into exposures, sort of
Mhm.
knowing that there was this chance that she could have cancer and still not doing, or that she could get cancer from the behavior she was doing and still not ritualizing despite
Mhm.
this or avoiding, right? And the viewer was saying that, when we're in that fight flight moment, right? When an obsession is really causing us to panic, that what they said was that it's impossible to do anything else except resist, like to just go with it and do whatever's going to make you comfortable, right?
Ritualize.
Right, to ritualize or to avoid or to calm yourself down in some other way, albeit substances, whatever it is, just to find a way to calm yourself down. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, about the choice that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I empathize with that person because I think that it does feel impossible. It does. I would say to me, when I started to do all my exposures that second time around in ERP, it felt like it was impossible for me to leave the house. It felt like it was impossible for me to go do the things I was asked to do. I think at one point my therapist was like, "All right, you have to start coming out to my office to see me." And I was like, "Whoa, I can't
Yeah,
do it."
right.
And I think that there were many times where I told him I can't, and he was like, you can't
Yeah,
or you won't."
right.
And at the time, I was like, "You're so mean. I can't believe you're being this hard on me. I can't." But
Yeah,
he was right. And, kind of validating how hard it feels to use these ERP skills, because I think at first it is really foreign and it feels really impossible. I
yeah, it
think when we
does.
go into that panic mode, that fight or flight that oftentimes OCD takes us to, that amygdala fires up, and
Yeah.
it's not easy to reach for the skills that we're just learning. It feels so much easier and more comfortable to go down this other well-worn path in our mind that
Mm-hmm.
says compulsion, it's going to be better.
Right.
The more I think we practice, and I think what I learned from therapy is that the more we practice when we are less activated,
Yes.
ERP
Oh,
skills,
excellent point.
the more easily we can access them when we are in fight or flight.
Right.
And even though it feels really scary to say, okay, well, there's this possibility that maybe I might get cancer, or maybe, my son's gonna get COVID and die. Um, yeah, I think we get that conflated. When we have OCD, we think, oh, if I'm accepting this possibility, that's as good as it happening. That
Right.
means that I'm literally accepting the fact that this thing is one day going to happen, and I cannot accept that.
Right.
And, it's acceptance is not that. It's not accepting that this thing is going to happen. It's not accepting that I'm a monster or I'm a
Or even accepting, even saying, I'm okay with this outcome, right? Because the truth
exactly
is that, our feared outcomes are feared for a reason. It's because it's like every last fiber of our being does not want it to
does not want to
happen.
be that way, and
Yeah.
does not want these things to happen exactly. But it's not accepting any of that stuff. It's not as good as done just because you're leaning in with acceptance. All you're saying is, yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
There is a possibility of just about anything happening in this world,
That's
and
right.
I'm okay with accepting that possibility so that I can live a more fulfilled life away from OCD forever trying to get certainty.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
I don't need 1000% certainty on anything in order to live,
Yeah.
you know? And that's what I had to accept in the end is, yeah, okay, maybe my son might get COVID.
Yeah.
Maybe my son might die.
Yeah.
And that is a real
And I think it's so
fear.
important that you say exactly that, because there are so many therapists out there who fall short of that acceptance, that level of acceptance, and their patients will just not get better, in my
We
opinion.
can get better to a certain point, but we don't get to that full empowerment if we don't have that full, I call it surrender,
Yes.
that surrender to acceptance. And
Yeah,
I
that's a
had to
great way to
accept
put
that
it.
maybe that it would happen. And I
That's right.
had to make the choice to say, I'm going to live my life according to my values, the way I want, despite everything OCD is saying,
Yeah.
because more than anything, I want to live empowered and to show my son to be an example to him because I wasn't being a good example,
Yeah.
of what functioning as a human being in this world looks like. And I don't want
Right.
him to grow up thinking the world is a big, bad, scary place.
Right.
And so I started doing exposures. I started going out, and guess what? I got COVID. And guess what? I gave it to my son.
Oh my goodness. And
No,
you know what? It's
it
so
really
funny.
got
This,
better, right? Because in those moments where I had COVID,
yeah.
I had compulsed my
Yeah.
way through everything. Like I was
Yeah.
wearing masks, I was sanitizing all the time, and I realized my compulsions
Yeah.
didn't keep us safe.
That's right. That's
They
right.
didn't. In
Yeah.
fact, they may have made it more likely for me to get COVID and give it to everybody in my house because I was so stressed out.
Right.
I was so stressed and I was doing all these extra things.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wow, my compulsions really don't work. And
Right.
all I'm doing is making myself and everybody around me miserable. And from that moment on, I was like, oh, well, fine. I'm not going to compulse anymore.
Right. Amazing. And it's interesting because if we actually think about what the research tells us about this, one of the things that we know is that those experiences where we sort of hope the bad thing won't happen, but then the bad thing does happen, right? And it might not be the worst case scenario, but it certainly is part of what you're fearing, that actually those experiences can be helpful in
Mhm.
terms of reducing overall arousal at later exposure. And so it
Yeah.
is sort of an interesting phenomenon. But, I think you've outlined actually some of the other things that I think are so important to answering that viewer's question about how we do it when we're in this panic. Part of it was that you had so many good reasons,
Mhm.
right? And I'm sure that was something you discussed with your therapist, was why it's important to do the treatment, right?
Yes, we
Yeah.
discussed, at length, why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? What is it that I want from treatment? What is it that
Yeah.
where do I see myself in, however many years? And, I would always be like, well, I see myself with, my family, healthy and happy, and we're doing all the things that families do. We're going out and we're having fun, and, you know,
Right.
I'm calm, I'm not freaking out, I'm not taking things away from him to wash them, because I was
Yeah.
doing those things and I struggled to even take him to the playground because I was so terrified.
Right.
And more than anything, like I desperately wanted to just be like a regular mom, a
Yeah.
mom who really enjoyed her son and was fully present.
Yeah.
And that was kind of that driving force is like I want to be the best mom I can be. I want to be a good wife. I don't want to send my husband to the basement. I want him to be happy with me and you
Yeah.
know to he's playing a game too. He's obviously very happy.
Yes.
But I want, I want us to have like this good, happy family.
Right.
And as cliche as that sounds.
No, it doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. And so I'm curious, so from this point that you were really doing so much better, how did you start on your journey to IOCDF, becoming an advocate eventually, and now you're training to be a therapist?
Oh my God. It's so funny. It's so funny. You're gonna giggle. So it's so good. It's so good. So literally, like, I was very agoraphobic-ish. I'm not gonna say I had agoraphobia, but I definitely would not leave my house. And so as
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting a little bit better, I started doing support groups with my therapist, like with other people on Zoom. And I was like, oh, this is good. I'm kind of like, I'm not alone. I'm getting a taste of
Yeah.
community. And my participation in those groups ended because they were like, they weren't like an infinite thing. It was like a term. And
Hmm.
I was like, well, now what? So I went on, of all places, Instagram, which I never went on Instagram. And I saw all these pages like of people with OCD, and I was like, oh, there are people like me? And so I like sat there and I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, I'm gonna make one. So I came up with a funny name, and I just started posting like my experiences as I was going through therapy. And I found community with other
Yeah.
people.
Which is
And I
so
stumbled,
important.
yes, and I kind of
Yeah.
stumbled into the IOCDF, and I was like, well, let me go volunteer in one of their special interest groups. So I joined the LGBTQ group, and I met Chris Tronson, and through him, just kind of started volunteering more, and eventually was accepted to be an advocate. And I did that for a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years, and it was a a wonderful experience. And then I got
Yeah.
really, really busy.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, as I kind of was advocating and doing all these things, I got it in my head that I really needed to go to one of the conferences. I got
Yeah.
the conference FOMO that everybody gets from seeing it
Yeah.
online. And
Right.
so I was like, I gotta go. I gotta go, even though I was still really sick. And so my first
Yeah.
conference I went and I was just wearing masks and compulsing all over. And I did the ERP walk with
With
John.
John. Yeah.
And
The road to recovery.
yes, the road to recovery where we did the live ERP. And I remember meeting John and just being like bowled over at like, this huge hero.
Yeah.
And he talked to me after the walk and he was like, let's go get something to eat. And I was like, me? And he was like, yes, you. And so we went to get something to eat, but there was no food, so we just sat down and talked. And after a couple hours, he was like, why are you not a therapist yet? And I was like, no, not me, I'm too sick.
Mm.
But he gave me the encouragement. He put it in my brain that maybe I should do it.
Yeah.
And we stayed in touch over email for a long time, and he kept checking in with me to see if I had applied to grad school. And so
Yeah.
finally, more to shut John up than anything because I didn't think I'd get in with my
Which is
GPA.
hard to do, by the way. Shutting John up. But yeah.
I applied to graduate school, and surprisingly, I got in. I
Wow.
couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. And so then I was like, oh, now I have to do this. And that was kind of all she wrote. I started
Wow.
doing graduate school, and I kind of, it took a step back from advocacy for a while because I needed balance in my life, and I had
Yeah.
none.
Yeah.
And here I am. And the more I talk to people in the community, the more I learn about mental health and OCD, the more I work with folks who have OCD, just
Yeah.
the more passionate I am about everything, and the more honestly it helps my recovery, as
Right.
selfish as that sounds, because I'm learning from everybody else,
Yeah.
and I'm really, kind of absorbing it.
Yeah. And it's incredible given where you were, right? That when you and I met, that night that we met, we were out on the road to recovery tour. And there you were doing the exposure, leading the exposures, right? And just amazing, absolutely
Thank you.
amazing. And so it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, I think you're such an inspiration. Now, I wanted to mention one other thing, just as sort of a mini treatment principle to remind those folks that are suffering, that question of how do we make ourselves do it when we're in that obsessive moment of panic, right? And, you know, John always says, and I think he's right, the question we might ask is, could you do it for 5 minutes,
Mm, I love
right?
that.
Yeah, I like that question a lot. And I think that, even when we're in sort of the worst shape, if we can delay even our compulsions, right? If we can stay in the moment of exposure, we win, right? If we
Yes.
stay there for just a little bit longer than we would, then we're winning, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it's so true. And something that I used to tell myself when I was really in the midst of it and I was really trying super hard to not decontaminate or to not, track things around my house that were dirty or whatever it um, was just, okay, if I stay with this for as long as I can, that's a
Right.
win. I don't have
Yeah.
to do it forever. I can stay with it for as long as I can, and I'm gonna call that a win. And the more I
Yeah.
practice that organically, I think the stronger that ERP muscle got,
Yeah.
and the more I was able to and willing to tolerate. And just by
Yeah.
doing that over and over and over again, I
Yeah.
got to the point where one conference I left and I came home and I looked at my husband. He said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I licked a shoe." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Hey, I licked the bottom of Dr. Grayson's shoe." And he was like, "Okay." And of course, this is really extreme. Not everybody needs to or wants to go around licking shoes, but I think
The
it's a
fact that you
testament.
could, the fact that you were able to do it and willing to do it and you did
Yes,
it. It's not that you
a
liked
testament.
licking John's shoe.
It's a testament to how just working that ERP muscle out
Right.
over time, repetitively, and just saying, I'm not going for the A plus, I'm just going for the good enough. I'm just going to tolerate this as long as I can, and I'm going to give
Yeah.
myself grace for the rest. It
Yeah.
can take you so much farther than you think. It's not in the big flashy exposures. It
That's
really is
right.
in that mundane, like that repeated practice,
It's
that
true.
doing that homework over and over again and really just committing to it and surrendering to it, even when we think it's boring or silly or ridiculous
Or impossible, or it feels
or
impossible.
impossible.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
it's maybe it feels impossible, but it's not always going to feel impossible if you
That's
at
right.
least give it a shot,
Oh,
you know?
boy. I mean, that speaks to, right. It's not an exposure. It's a lifestyle. It's an exposure lifestyle,
It
right?
is an exposure
Yeah.
lifestyle, and I think that's
Yeah.
important too, because that's that piece I was missing at first, is really
Yeah.
doing living my life as this very intentional. I'm going to lean in when I start to feel anxious. That's my cue to lean into what I'm doing and not run away. And
Yeah.
to this day, that's what I do. If I feel like canceling plans because of anxiety, that's
Yeah.
my cue to go do it.
Yeah.
If I'm getting anxious at the thought of sitting in a restaurant to eat, that's my cue to sit in two or three restaurants to eat.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I hope everybody really hears that, because that is, boy, that's such a powerful message.
And I think you can testify to that. You witnessed.
I did. Yeah. And it's so, I mean, and it's so interesting, right? As far along as you are in your treatment, it's not that you are completely symptom free. You still have moments that you have to push through, and push through you do. And it's
Yes.
really, like I said, so inspiring to so many people.
I think that's what recovery is. I'm able to live my life on my own terms, even
Yeah.
with OCD there. It's
Yeah.
not that OCD is not present. It's not that I don't get these awful thoughts. It's that I get the awful thoughts and I go, okay, cool thoughts. I'm going to go do exactly the opposite of what you're saying because I know that that's going to keep me better. And, going back to that values piece, something that I found helpful was not only is my son a value, but recovery
Yeah.
is a value.
That's right.
Me doing the things that I need to do, that I know I need to do to stay well and stay in my recovery, have
Hmm.
really become a value for me. And
Yeah.
some things I have to do that maybe other people don't have to do because my
Hmm.
OCD was super severe and my contamination was really severe. And I also have comorbid stuff,
Yeah.
so some of those extreme exposures, I try to do those once a year because I
Yeah.
know they keep me well. Not
Absolutely.
everybody has to do that,
Yeah.
but doing the things that you are aware of that keep you well can
Yeah.
be a sort of value that you hold.
Yeah. I agree. Oh my gosh, Alex, such an inspiration. We're actually
Oh,
coming up on the end of
you're
our
so sweet.
hour, and I can't even believe how quickly it went. And I have to apologize. My guess is that so I'm using new streaming software, and I was not aware that we weren't going to have questions popping up. That I wouldn't be able to like see our questions, which I'm
Oh
super bummed
no.
about. But you know what that means, Alex? That
What?
means that you're going to have to come back another time to answer people's questions, if that's
I
okay
was
with
wondering
you.
about that. Yeah, what we should do is, oh God, this is a good idea. Maybe we can, I don't know, whenever you want to do it, we can come back and just do like a Q&A.
That would be
That might
great.
be
I think
fun.
that would be wonderful. I think people would love to have an opportunity to ask questions. And so hopefully at that point I'll figure out the streaming software and then it'll be a
Yeah,
smoother kind of
absolutely.
experience for all of us.
Look, I'm just knocking things over here.
That's
I
okay.
will try also, if I can remember, because sometimes I'm, doom scrolling at night because I'm
Right?
human. I will
Yes,
try to pop on YouTube too and see if I can answer any people's questions on YouTube. So if you have a
that would be
question, you
great.
can maybe leave
Yeah.
it in the comments and I'll try to come around and get to it.
Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Alex. I'm gonna end the live broadcast at this point. But thank you so much. What a
Thank you for
wonderful
having
opportunity to
me.
have you here.